I wanted to do some slightly less formal talking about thematic analysis today while I'm working on bigger stuff. So today I wanted to talk to you about the thematics of the trio of sibling orders of Radiance. The Skybreakers, the Windrunners, and the Bondsmiths. In order to do this, I'm going to be talking about spoilers through Oathbringer. I'm not sure you really can talk about Skybreakers or Bondsmiths without them, so if you haven't read that yet, maybe wait on watching this video. But if you have, on we go. I'm going to talk about how the three of those and the way that they conceive of honor in different ways kind of come together to form the soul of any given nation or society. So we're going to start out by talking about Windrunners. The honor of Windrunners is the honor that lives in your heart. It's what feels right to do at any given point in time. And Windrunner honor is largely focused on protection, but it's important to know that who that protection is for is really based on what feels right to you. Still, Kaladin's Sprint acknowledges that there's not any objective way of knowing what is honor. It's kind of just a thing that is felt. So when Windrunners go about acting in the world, they're acting on their own internal emotional sense of what is honorable actions. This means that Windrunners, while being extremely protection-focused, are in general going to be biased towards protecting the people who are in front of them, because it's always much easier to feel strongly about the people that you can see in this concrete situation in front of you than it is to care about a bunch of abstract people who you don't know and have never met. Now, we mostly get really good Windrunners in the books, and in fact, Kaladin is potentially the best Windrunner you could ask for, and that Kaladin has a really inclusive personal moral code. Kaladin's dad was a pacifist, and Kaladin grew up believing that all people and all lives had value, which is exactly what you want in a good Windrunner. Kaladin is able to look at the situation and say when he meets Ken and the other singers, he's able to say, oh, these are people. These people also need protection. And suddenly there's a whole nother dimension to the war that wasn't there before. A Windrunner with an inclusive moral code is maybe the best conduit you could possibly have for bringing up problems with a culture or society's view on the world and the way that they're handling things, because their goal is going to be to protect people who they see as needing protection. And that's going to include a lot of disadvantaged groups. And I think there could have been a really interesting arc in Kaladin taking up the singer cause. But the reason that I'm talking about Kaladin's really inclusive personal morality is that when what is right and what is allowed to you is dependent on how morality feels in your heart, if your moral code is not as inclusive, it becomes a lot easier to hurt people that you don't feel are as much people, in order to protect the people that you do care about. We know that Windrunners are allowed to kill in order to protect. So the less inclusive a Windrunner's morality is, the more they're going to be able to justify killing people who don't fall within their vision of who are people and who's important. While the third oath of the Windrunner does require Windrunners to broaden their conception of who needs protection a little bit, it doesn't actually require them to expand their definition of who has personhood. So, to put that into perspective a little bit, think about the way that different bigoted groups will tend to dehumanize religious or racial others, on the one hand, and the way that a Windrunner who cares very deeply about protection but doesn't view those people as full people is going to operate in the world, and then on the other hand, think about, like, vegans, who expand that definition of who deserves protection to include animals as well. And the way that those two different people are going to behave really differently with the Windrunner set of oaths and the Windrunner morality. This is kind of made more meaningful by the fact that Windrunners are generally incredibly staunch defenders, and Honor Spren too, are incredibly staunch defenders of this morality that exists only in their hearts. And if you've ever interacted with someone who insists vehemently upon the absolute correctness of a moral code that you don't agree with, I think you start to see where the problem potentially lies if Windrunners are just left to their own devices. And, of course, if Windrunners have diverse backgrounds and origins, because a lot of the Windrunners that we've seen in the story so far come from Kaladin's group. Maybe in the future we will see Windrunners of a bunch of different backgrounds and get to explore this a little bit more in the text. Windrunner morality is fallible in all the ways that human morality is very typically fallible, in that it's much easier to care about the people who are in front of you, who you know, who you're familiar with, than it is to care about people who are different and far away and harder to see. If you think back to Words of Radiance, Kaladin agreed to help Moash and crew kill Elhokar. And whatever you think about Elhokar, I need you to understand that Kaladin agreed to this because he thought it was right. Elhokar was causing a lot of damage by being a bad king, and a lot of people were getting hurt as a result. He was consistently putting his friends in positions where they were able to abuse their power and harm members of underclasses. He was also living in luxury and feasting whilst people were killing and dying in a war he was ordering them to pursue, but almost never fought in himself. Elhokar was a really bad king. And I want to be clear, Kaladin thought it would protect more people to remove Elhokar. However, because Kaladin felt in his heart that it was wrong to allow for the death and enable the death of somebody he had been charged with protecting, he could not allow people to kill Elhokar. Trying to allow people to kill Elhokar almost broke his oaths. He thought that it was the right thing, but he felt that it was wrong, and so he couldn't do it. I also want to point out that because of that bias towards the people who are directly in front of you, while Kaladin did eventually refuse to actually do battle with the Parshendi once he saved Dalinar, he never actually even considered siding with the side of the war that was fighting for their survival, in spite of the fact that he swore an oath to protect those who could not protect themselves. He continued to fight on the side of the war that was pursuing a genocidal vengeance quest over the side of the war fighting for their lives because of his inherent biases towards humans. So, Windrunners, great activists. It is good to have people around who are making sure to live what they feel is right. Really bad at making calls in terms of big picture morality, or any kind of call that requires them to make morally dubious decisions in the present in order to get a better outcome. Adjacent to the Windrunners are the Skybreakers. The Skybreakers are one of the two sibling orders of the Windrunners, sharing the surge of gravitation, and I'm going to be talking a lot about the Skybreakers as they should be. See, I don't know if you've seen Brandon Sanderson's Which Radiant Order Are You quiz. And I don't know if you've looked through all of the Radiant Orders. The description of the Skybreakers is really funny, but basically it boils down to Brandon Sanderson going, look, I know they're kind of fucked in the books right now because Nail is kind of a crazy person, but like, trust me, they stand for actual good things. Anyway, I'm going to talk about what Skybreaker morality is supposed to be, and not what the Skybreaker organization currently is. I will get to that a little bit, but we're going to talk about Skybreaker oaths as they are intended to be. Which is to say that Skybreaker morality is specifically not about what lives in the heart. Skybreakers specifically believe that honor is in being able to set aside your feelings and set aside your own convictions and being able to properly execute your role and your responsibilities and the rules of the land. It's really easy to joke about the fact that Nail basically does whatever the fuck he wants, and basically just uses, technically it's legal as a justification to do whatever he wants, but like, Think about what the law actually is for a sec. The law is the social contract. It's the rules by which the society has agreed it wants to live. And sure, that's going to be flawed in all of the ways that societies are flawed, but Skybreakers believe very strongly that the morality of the society as a whole is going to, on average, be better than the morality of any individual person in it. Before the Recreants, it was the job of the Skybreakers to keep both the upper classes and the other Radiant orders in check, and make sure that no one was behaving as though they were above the law. So ideally, Skybreakers are incredibly egalitarian as Radiant orders go. They make sure that no one is above the law, and they make sure that everyone has equal access to the justice system. However, you may have noticed that this is not what they do in the books. When Skybreakers go wrong, you get all of the same kinds of corruption that you get in real justice systems in the real world. You get a lot of people just kind of enacting whatever it is that they want to enact, but using the law as a justification to hide behind. You also get kind of blind following of the laws without thinking about what they mean or what the spirit of them is. And because Nail is kind of a mess, this has become the default for Skybreakers. Additionally, even when Skybreakers are behaving properly, they are likely to enforce laws that are made by people who are powerful. And the law tends to favor people who are powerful, and while Skybreakers will happily cut you down as soon as you overstep your bounds, you're definitely not above the law. They're not really good as an activist organization, if that makes sense. They're good checks and balances when they're working properly, but they're not going to fix anything that's wrong with the justice system, because that would literally defeat the point. So Skybreakers, ideally, really good justices. Make sure that the rules are applying equally to everyone, make sure that no one is overstepping their bounds. In an unideal world, they are going to have all the problems any criminal justice system is normally going to have. So if with Skybreakers and Windrunners you have honor as determined by you, the individual, and honor as determined by the society in which you live, the other sibling of the Windrunners, the Bondsmiths, who are joined by the Surge of Adhesion with Windrunners, are kind of the opposite. If Windrunners are honor to the people in front of you, Bondsmiths are about honor that is owed to the society. The honor of the Bondsmith is about bringing people together and bringing people in, and making sure that that coalition that they form, making sure that that collective is taken care of. Where Kaladin, who's a Windrunner, can look at Ken and the other singers when he meets them and go, "Hey, these are people, we shouldn't be killing people." Dalinar, who's a Bondsmith, has to look at all of this and say, "Hey, those people are still foot soldiers, and if we don't, what's gonna happen to our coalition? If we start refusing to fight these people, what's gonna happen to all of the people who have put their trust in us?" Bondsmiths have to think about their responsibility to everyone in their coalition. And sometimes that means making messy decisions. One of the things that is part of Bondsmith honor is getting people together and finding the compromises that keep the society together, even though sometimes those are messy and uncomfortable. Dalinar is happy to go and talk to all of the other leaders and bring in other leaders in Roshar and the ways that they do things, which is great. But Dalinar also gives Kaladin lands and titles when Kaladin acquires a shard blade and becomes a Radiant, even though Kaladin doesn't really want it, because in this society that Dalinar and Kaladin are living in, it is threatening to existing power structures for Kaladin to be a Dark Eyes and identify as a Dark Eyes and still be of low status whilst being a Radiant and having a shard blade. Both of these actions are actions taken on behalf of cohesion and unity, but one of them is inclusive, and one of them is upholding existing problematic power structures for the sake of avoiding conflict. The whole thing about Bondsmith morality is that the devil is in the details, because it really is their job. to find the compromises that balance the needs of the people in their society and hold that society together. However, there are a lot of ways to hold a society together that are not super okay. The job of the Bondsmith is to coalition build, and I want to remind you that while Dalinar has become highly honorable, Dalinar started out by trying to unite all of the Alethi princes by pursuing genocide. Getting serious about genocide. And before you tell me that that's an unusual or weird thing, I want to point out that Gavilar was getting the kinds of visions that Dalinar eventually got that kind of pointed to him as a proto-bondsmith. And Gavilar intended that genocide. Unlike Dalinar, Gavilar didn't just kind of end up with that genocide on his lap. Gavilar wanted to make an enemy that he could kill indiscriminately. Because a common enemy unites people. Bondsmith honor is about uniting people. Any way of uniting people is valid. In line with that, Bondsmith honor is to their coalition, their groups of concern. Which means that if you were never gonna be part of their coalition, if you're not interested in joining, they don't really owe you anything. On the one hand, this is great, because I want my country's leaders to be looking after the people in my country. You know, the people they have their responsibilities to. But on the other hand, when unity is your primary concern, you're allowed to do a lot of coercive or sketchy things in order to maintain it. It's a lot easier to keep everyone pointed in the same direction when you can find them a common enemy to get mad at. Like, you know, the listeners. Or when you are willing to implement coercive laws in order to keep people moving in the direction you want them moving in. One of the big problems with Bondsmith ideology, and one of the things I kind of worry about with Dalinar, is that it's really easy when you make unity your goal to, when someone brings up an injustice in your society, view the fact that they're bringing it up and creating disunity or schisms over trying to get it fixed as a bigger problem than the actual thing they're trying to address. It's a lot easier to run a society smoothly and keep everyone on the same page working towards the same things when everyone just stays in their place, which I think is kind of inherently problematic as a thing to want from people in an unjust society. So hopefully I've illustrated to your satisfaction that each of these types of honor serves a very specific purpose within a society, and absolutely cannot be the only thing a society runs on. In a nation that's behaving reasonably, and in a good and just society that really does desire to get better, you do have leaders who are trying to push for unity and making sure that everyone is working together and making the compromises that are necessary to keep everyone on the same page, because society benefits everyone when it's working properly. And then you've also got your activists who can give your leaders a kick in the pants when they see that there's some kind of injustice going on, some group of people society is failing to protect or doing wrongly by. And you've got a good judicial system, which can keep tyrants in check and make sure that the leaders aren't abusing the people, and keep ideological zealots in check as well, and make sure that they're not overstepping the needs of everyone else in the society in order to get what they want. That's your Bondsmiths, your Windrunners, and your Skybreakers in order. But when any of these things starts to cease to function, you start having problems. A Bondsmith unchecked easily becomes a tyrant, as unity and keeping people together and on the same page and moving in the same direction becomes more important than actually guaranteeing their quality of life. A society full of Windrunners, all pointed in different directions and with different moral codes, is a society that is prone to having groups of people who believe that they need to hurt each other in order to protect the people who matter to them. And a society with broken Skybreakers is a society whose laws may not reflect the values of the population and may not be practiced in spirit, even if the intent behind them is good. Without all of these things working properly and in tandem, you start to lose the things that make nationhood a cohesive unit, but also a positive state of being for the people that live under it. It's easy to look at any one of these types of honor and see that it is deeply inadequate, but honor is a messy thing, and all of these types of honor are good and important in the settings where they are meant to be used. Society works best when all three of these are present and working in tandem, checking one another and helping one another accomplish their goals. You need all of them in order to form a cohesive state, a cohesive society that actually serves the people living in it. However, it's important to acknowledge that all forms of honor fail when the people who are applying them cast too narrow a net as to who deserves consideration. For this reason, I believe that as of Rhythms of War, Jasna and Relaine are the two most honorable characters in the Stormlight Archives. Thank you for coming to my TED Talk, and please remember to like, comment, and subscribe. Bye!